Well, welcome to the journey. This is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of the journey. And today we have a special guest to join us, Greg Young. He was on approximately a month ago or so. He was on the show and was talking about his career in ministry, as well as his career in working with first responders, working with the police and fire specifically, and targeting critical incident stress management and doing debriefs and diffusing and helping out with that process. And how I got to meet Greg, he came into Rockford and trained five of us from KP and one from a local hospital on going through the process of being critical incident stress management facilitators. And so, Greg, thank you for being back on the journey and have really enjoyed our time that we've gotten to know each other over the last 4 or 5 months. And so I know that, again, that beautiful picture in the background, I know you shared last time is your a glance of what it looks like up in northern Michigan. And
That's right. That's
and
right. Yeah.
so I want to just start us off as we're welcoming you back to the journey. As you think back over the last couple of weeks, what for you would be something that stood out to you as something you're grateful for?
Wow. That's a good question. I mean, I can't be limited to just one particular thing. First and
Sure.
foremost, my family. First
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
foremost, my family. They ground me, Kevin. You know how that is.
Mhm.
And most recently, the great weather we've been having. That
Yep.
you've been sending up from down Rockford way up to Wisconsin.
Yep.
So enjoying that and getting outside and in nature, being able to exercise, just being grateful for this gift of today. I mean, it's a package. Every day, I get up in the morning and I thank God that here's a brand new gift. Come what may, but the package is only partially unwrapped, just as today is. So yeah, so just I try to cultivate an attitude of gratitude
Yeah.
wherever I can.
Yeah. Well, and I know for me, I have it's like the exercise of mindfulness for me is that I believe wholeheartedly in the attitude of gratefulness and bringing that to the forefront of our minds. Um, but I know for me, my tendency, and I was just talking about this over the weekend, is my tendency is to be like 3 steps ahead
Hmm.
about what's gonna, all right, where do I have to turn, that type of thing. Um and the key I know is when I'm in my best spot is when I'm just where I'm at, not worrying about what I have to do an hour from now or 3 hours from now or whatever, and living within that tension of preparation, but also being present.
In the
And
moment.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 And when I do that, I'm in a much better place. When I'm not doing that, then I'm putting a lot of energy to something that hasn't happened and may very well not happen like I'm thinking it's gonna.
That's right. Anticipatory, refer to that, I think, in a training we had as anticipatory stress.
Yep.
I mean, it's like it could be bad or good. I mean, the example I use a lot of times in my presentations, Kevin, is I said, imagine like say a Wednesday or Thursday, you've been having a health issue, you think maybe something going on, and you go and say for an MRI. And they say, well, we think there's something there, but we need to have, so and so check it out, and we'll get back to you next Wednesday. By the way, have a nice weekend. So, what are you going to be? Are you going to be living in the moment then, or are you going to be anticipating what did they find, until you get to whenever they can give you your test results? So, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's being in the moment is so important, and it's so darn hard to do. I mean, you're busy, I'm busy, and just thinking of, what's already going to be happening this week now that it's Monday,
Mhm.
and it's hard just to be in the moment. So I'm going to try to be as much in the moment today as I possibly can.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point because we only have right now to be able to focus on,
Yeah.
because something can be completely different, come Tuesday. You were speaking of the weather, and in this time of year, especially for us in the Midwest, when we're having those large fluctuations of cold to warm, and then flipping around, that also leads to some thunderstorms, and those thunderstorms could lead to high winds or tornadoes. And we ended up getting hit in the Rockford area with tornadoes. And an adjacent town, Belvedere, Illinois, got hit, and there was a rock concert going on, and the roof collapsed.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I remember when that happened, I checked. I said, Belvedere, that sounds like it was pretty close to where, where the Rockford area is. So, but I also trained a lot of people in Little Rock. And
Okay.
Little Rock got hammered.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's that season. It's that
Yeah.
season too. Yeah,
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
sure. Glad everybody, at least I know, at least down your way,
Yeah.
is okay.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it was just one of those things of how quickly, granted, with the technology we have now, there was a lot of preparation, letting us know that there was going to be this adverse weather. Unfortunately, sometimes is that because we get so much information about storms coming, that I don't know how often we take it serious. And then of course, when it does hit, then we're definitely taking it serious for the next one, and the next one may not hit, so then we start becoming desensitized again.
That's right. That's right. Like that's right. That's right.
So, but yeah, but it was interesting because I had met with this local SISM team on Thursday night, and the storm happened on Friday.
Okay.
And I was waiting because we hadn't got on the list yet officially with the Blackhawk SISM. And so I was like, okay, are we going to get called? Are we not going to get called? And then about a week later, there was someone else who reached out to us about possibly, I haven't heard anything at this point. We're working with the staff who were at the theater, not working with the first responders, but the staff. So it was very much on my mind when the storm, after the storm had passed, and then I heard about the damage at the theater.
Yeah.
That so we were ready, but we didn't get the call, so that was okay.
Well, it's kind of interesting because it's not if, it's when, Kevin.
Right.
And you bring up a good point talking about that theater roof collapse. And, that was very concerning, obviously, to me, and certainly would have warranted having you come in and do some diffusing or debriefing, because that's a part of that outreach to your greater community,
Yep.
which is why we do these things, and, it's going to come again, and as you get to be better known, people understand the importance of using these tools that we taught. It will only expand your outreach and visibility, I think.
Yeah. So just as a reminder, if we have anybody new listening, if you could, Greg, maybe just give us a very brief, not the 2-day training part of it, but very brief, what is considered a critical incident, and then when just to maybe a little bit, because we've already thrown out the words diffuse and debriefing, maybe just a very vanilla version of what does that mean, so our listeners can get an idea of what do we mean by critical incident, what do we mean by diffusing, what do we mean by debriefing.
Okay, well, and then I'll also try to explain what SISM is,
Sure.
for people who don't know what it is. Critical incident obviously depends on the person because, as you know, trauma affects each of us differently and how we react to that. But a critical incident, most of the critical incidents that I have done lots of debriefings for, and we train teams that they respond to, are incidents usually where there may be a loss of life, or it could be some sort of a mass incident, those kinds of things. You can almost bet the ranch that a debriefing would be called for those people who respond to, that homogenous group we talked about, to say the death of a child, or anything, or an officer involved shooting, if we're talking first responders, firefighter, or an EMS person killed in the line of duty. All those things would be, certainly common, but I was up at Aurora Baycare in Green Bay. There was a high school, Pulaski High School, made the news last year. Bonfire, and some guys had a drum full of diesel fuel, threw it on the bonfire that the high school students were at. It exploded, and these kids had to be 60 of them. Well, there were 60, about 60 there. 20 or 30 of them were burned. Some had to be flighted down to Children's Hospital or the burn units here in the Milwaukee area. And Aurora Baycare said, I just trained their team, and they said, could you come up and help us with the debriefing? So it could be for any kinds of incidents like that, Kevin.
Mhm.
Usually car crashes following officers shot and killed in line of duty. I've done a lot of officer involved shooting ones, if we're talking first responders, so on and so forth. But usually when it's the death of children, because all of us either have kids, but it's just something deep within us. I mean, children, if something horrible happens to children or something horrible is done to a child, we need to respond to that.
Mhm.
So we can provide one-on-one, certainly, that kind of stuff. Diffusing is for generally just to kind of help your listeners. Diffusing is a small process. It's within 8 hours of post incident, when only for those people who actually responded to the incident. You could do civilians separately. If it's first responder kind of response, you could do them, but don't include civilians, because they need the freedom to kind of talk about their reactions to that incident, and civilians could do the same. So we don't want to miss them as well. A debriefing, though, which is what we do most of, obviously 24 to 72 hours post incident, you get that same group together, and you go through it's a structured 7-step process, and it can be very helpful. But it's part of a continuum of mental health care. As you know, working professionally in mental health, it's kind of like the expression we use in CISM, or critical incident stress management, is this: just as first aid is to, say, surgery, psychological first aid is to psychotherapy. And so that's kind of the mantra, that we use for what critical incident stress management, and what that is. It's a set of tools, from working individually with people, which is something that we do most of, actually, but also then having other tools like a crisis management briefing. Say something happens in a school or a large company, where you can get everybody involved, and just basically lay out the facts of what happened, because rumors run rampant in the fog of crisis or disaster or war. To get those facts out, but also just to let them know that we are going to be providing services for those who may be more affected and want to talk to somebody. So that crisis management briefing and then the diffusing are only for those who were most exposed to the traumatic incident, that critical incident, either responding to it, or, like in the case of, say, let's take the theater, those who were involved, like Pulaski bonfire, the kids that were at the bonfire. So it would be a very similar kind of parallel,
Mhm.
but the debriefing then would be for that same group. So hopefully that answers your question
Sure.
in less than 2 days.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, exactly. So when you had just mentioned something too, and again, for just clarification, when you refer to psychological first aid
Yep.
and refer to critical incident stress management training, tell us a little, are those separate, or are they fall underneath one or the other? Yeah, tell us a little bit about that from
Well,
your just from your perspective.
psychological first aid is actually a pretty generic term. There are lots
Mhm.
of groups that talk about psychological first aid, and they may have modalities of training, that you could use for it. Some better than others, but that's another conversation. But it falls under that broader category. Psychological first aid is what critical incident stress management is for. It's not an end all. It may be all some people need, though, Kevin, as I'm sure you know. Some people are going to be okay, other people may not. But it's also a platform for screening to see how folks when using these tools, if they're, say, involved in this intervention, in a diffusing or debriefing. And some of them may need more care, and so usually we can tell, if we're facilitating these, who's not handling it really well. So we want to discreetly go up to them and maybe suggest, that maybe, so we can better help them more effectively, they might benefit from additional help beyond what CISM could provide. Does
Sure,
that help?
sure. No, 100%. And again, I think, to your point, I was with a gentleman 2 weeks ago, and he talked about an incident as a first responder, as a police officer, that he was involved with and went through a debrief. And for him, he went into the debrief thinking, I'm air quoting, thinking he was okay, and had put it into a proper perspective because of what had happened and what he was involved with regarding it. And then when he went through the debrief, that then allowed him, not necessarily even at the time, but later when he reflected on him, it allowed him to put it into a different category, which then helped him frame it a little bit different. And again, you've heard this 1,000 times, is that, oh, someone else was thinking the same thought. Oh, that's
Yeah.
how someone else felt too. And that way of knowing that I wasn't alone and being able to
Yeah.
generalize. And then, in his case, he didn't even talk in it about the piece that was the insight later that he had, but he had benefited from the group as he was listening. Even though he shared what he had experienced, it was later that even though he didn't verbalize it, it was still he got a significant benefit from partaking in that group debrief.
Well, as you know, because you do some wonderful work, all of you, with your groups, at KP Counseling and other places. Remember Yalom's 11 factors, therapeutic factors of why groups are effective, and you just kind of really touched on it, because one of the things too, Kevin, related to what you just said, and I think I might have said this, but for the benefit of the listeners, is that, say, for instance, you have a department and you've got a command staff, if we're talking, say, first responders, or you have a business executive saying, this has happened, you're going, and you may think, well, I'm fine. I don't need to go. This is a waste of my time. This is BS, whatever the case may be. But here's the thing, we can motivate those people knowing if that may be the policy, come in to facilitate these. And what I say, and I'll reiterate this, say, look, some of you may not want to be here. We get it. But, we're glad you're here. Those that are here who, that you work with or you work alongside with are glad you can hear. You're providing moral support, if nothing else. You don't have to say anything, but you may have, if you decide to share something, that missing puzzle piece that another person, or that thought that other person was thinking, but were maybe a little apprehensive to share, that that would be a benefit to others. So but it does, and it kind of helps. It's that universal concept. We're not alone in this. Hey, I thought I was going crazy, to use a very non-therapeutic term, not a clinical term,
Yeah.
but I think I'm losing it. But that's the way cops talk anyway. But thinking, other people are feeling this way too, just like you said. And that is huge. It really is. It validates where they're at.
Yeah.
And that's important part of this process.
Yeah, very much so. So Greg, I want to ask you again. I know that you have done a lot of things throughout your career, been involved with a lot of different things, and at this point in your career, this is, as I follow you and got to know you over the last few months, it seems that's the two areas that stand out to me probably the most is obviously the trainings that you do with training individuals like me and the other team members at KP, and other groups, or even larger groups, you're training, or going in and getting called to a debrief itself. And then you have a whole nother world that you are involved with as a guest, as a speaker, and teaching on, I'm assuming Sundays, but maybe not, with a church that you're involved with. And so,
Right.
so let me just ask, well, one, how do you switch hats, regarding that? And what have you, because I believe that when we are really working within that flow, even if we're switching hats, we're still going in the same direction,
Yep. Yep.
and we're still doing the same mission, even if we have different roles as we're going down that path. And so maybe tell us a little bit, just from that. Well, I mean, obviously people know that you're instructor. That's how we met, for SISM, and then you get called to help out in a debrief, or probably sometimes a diffusing, but probably more for the debrief, just
Yeah.
from locale. But then you have this other opportunity to teach on the weekend to participate in your congregation. So yeah, tell me a little bit about that, about those two worlds.
That's an easy segue. There is a flow there, Kevin. Very
Okay.
much so. I mean, we know each other. I mean,
Yeah,
that's I guess why we're together.
sure.
But it's yeah, I always told people, at least at this point in my journey, in ministry in the church, it's part-time, has to be part-time. And the church was actually it's been a wonderful, wonderful marriage. It really has. And I told them, I said, I'm a better pastor by doing ministry in the trenches. And by the trenches, it's that other stuff. It's that other stuff. When I respond to this crisis, or I make a death notification, or and all of these kinds of things that I respond to, that we talked about in the previous, installment of our time together. Those things make me a more effective pastor. If I had just gone to college, graduate school, seminary, and become a pastor, and really didn't have that kind of boots on the ground experience, I wouldn't, I mean, other pastors, that's fine. That's maybe their cup of tea, but it just so happens to be how I'm wired. That's my calling. That's my why.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Perfect. I know a couple weeks ago, you were presenting a message, and it caught my attention when I saw the title of it, because it reminded me of what we talk about in Shatter Our Silence, and what I talk about many times when I'm doing my teachings, about this idea that we have all been created with a light within us,
Oh
and
yeah.
then I believe we have a responsibility, uh, when we're present, when that light will shine bright, and we have a responsibility, uh, to be a light in others' darkness.
Oh, that's
And
kind of like the Papaderos piece, right? The with Robert Fulghum, when he was at a seminar. This Greek philosophy professor that had an old German World War II Nazi motorcycle mirror, and he asked him what the meaning of life was. Is that what you're referring to?
well, I want to hear that story. Go ahead and
Okay.
continue that
Well,
story.
I
Yes.
could, in fact, that's in my book, but it's, and I've used it in a sermon too, actually. It's, Robert Fulghum was, I think, I don't remember the name of the country. I mean, your listeners probably know it, maybe chapter and verse, but he was in someplace overseas. I'm thinking, I don't remember the name of the country, it doesn't matter, at a seminar. And he asked this question near the end of this lecture of this, I think he was a philosophy professor, older guy. And he asked him, Dr. Papaderos, I think is his name. So like a Greek sounding name. What is the meaning of life? And first you thought, well, Papaderos is going to be like, if somebody were to ask you or I, what's the
Mhm,
meaning of life?
mhm.
And I was like, okay, this guy being snarky, what's he doing here?
Right.
But Dr. Papaderos just stared at him. He just stared at him for the longest time. And he walks over to essentially, to kind of abbreviate the story. It's a beautiful story, Kevin. And he walks over to the window. He takes out of his pocket. He had actually rounded. He said this was a piece of a German Nazi motorcycle mirror, because he obviously had lived through the war and all of that stuff. And he had polished the edges, so there weren't any sharp edges. He keeps it in his pocket. And it was a sunny day, and he walks over to the lecture hall, and shines the light, reflects the light from that mirror onto the people, on Fulgham and the other people in the classroom, he said, our responsibility is to shine essentially that light on to everyone we meet. That is our purpose in life. That's the meaning of it. It's a beautiful story. Look it up.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
do justice to it for
yeah,
your,
yeah.
but it's
Well,
great.
and so that actually is the first time I've heard that story. And but I think like for me, when I originally looked at that, it was a combination of different things that I kind of came together. One, uh, in the New Testament, St. Paul refers to us, is that we shouldn't, there's no benefit of the light if it's underneath, if it's being covered
Bushel.
up. Yes,
Yeah.
and so, and then my uh, studying of Lakota traditions,
Right.
when medicine men and medicine women would say that their ability to heal came from the Great Spirit, and they were just a vessel in which the Great Spirit, God, the Holy Spirit, moved through to heal the client or heal the patient. And that for me early on, when I knew that I knew nothing at all about counseling, but I was hence still had a job and I was supposed to do it, it was that reliance on to be that vessel
Yeah.
in which to heal. And so that was really this idea that we all have that light within us, and and equally, because of trauma, because of situations, because of crisis, we may find ourselves in a darkness, the absence of light.
Yeah.
And so how do I hang on to the belief and the knowing that the light is within me? It's just being eclipsed right now because of usually my thinking. It's being eclipsed, and so the light hasn't gone anywhere. It's just that it's being eclipsed. And how do I hold on to not act on the darkness?
I once heard at a conference in Colorado, a speaker talk about, and it's an expression I've used actually in messages that I've done, very similar to the Lakota stuff you're talking about, that we need to become, what is it? How can we become clarified vessels through which God's light can shine
Yeah,
to others?
yeah,
So very similar, very parallel kind of thought. Love it.
yeah, yeah,
Love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like anything, right? When you're when you're focused on gratitude, like we started earlier talking about, then
Mhm.
I'm going to see more things to be grateful about. When I'm focused on what can I do to continually work at being that light, it just naturally is going to illuminate onto others.
Oh,
And
oh, yeah.
then I'm if I'm concentrating on that and being intentional, maybe is a better word than concentrating, being intentional about that, then I'm attracting more things that support that.
Absolutely. And you're also going to be, people are going to be attracted to you. I mean, think of the kinds of people that any of us as human beings are attracted to, you
Mhm.
know? For me, it's like, I mean, if you look like the proverbial, I have nothing against other religions, the proverbial Ayatollah, kind of that frown, stern look,
Mhm.
who wants to be around people like that? In fact, my vision of Christ is that he's one of those people, it's almost like a magnet. The
Mhm.
people are drawn to him because of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with you. In my mental model of what Jesus looks like is different than my previous teaching and model that I had of God, and I'm still working on that process. and
Aren't we
it,
all? Aren't we all?
yeah, and because that old teaching doesn't go away very easy, because I when I'm how do I look at this situation that happens as an opportunity for growth versus it being punishment only,
Yeah.
with a setback or whatever it may be. So let me ask, for you, as we're kind of, as you in your life, right, walk back and forth fluidly between these two worlds, two different worlds that you're teaching, though the message, the words may be different, the message may be the same.
Yeah, I would say the core message is probably the same. Yeah,
Yeah,
to be sure.
yeah, because ultimately when we go to do a debrief, we're not coming in and talking about rainbows and unicorns. You know,
No.
but nonetheless, the fact that we're willing to walk into the darkness doesn't mean that I'm giving
Yep.
up my light to do that. I'm walking to the darkness because there's light within.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And doing the debriefs, it's all right. One thing I always tell people, and I'm sure you do the same thing, is that when somebody or a group invites me to walk with them on that, I could refer to it as Frederick Buechner calls it the sacred journey. We walk through that sacred journey, down that dark path, to be with them. I consider that a real honor, to be able that they entrust you or me or others, who to do that, because that's a very vulnerable time, as you know, and just to be able to do that, we don't want to violate that trust either. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, we're on the same wavelength, my friend, my brother. Yeah.
So when you think of examples over time, maybe recently, maybe some other time, um, I have situations that I think of that have affirmed that I am staying to that value, that model of striving to be that light, striving to um, contain or diffuse anything that gets into my way, gets into my thinking from being present. Um, there's times though when something gets reflected back, either because of something that's been said or someone else, or it just I get to witness it, that
Hmm.
the dots are connecting, or somebody receives something, right? And so when you think about either from when you're working in the church, or when you've been called to something, or working with some future instructors, what are some things that have affirmed that, yes, this is what Greg's supposed to be doing right now?
Wow. I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke at a cybersecurity conference, and I thought that's really kind of out of my domain.
Mm-hmm.
It's at the Wisconsin Center right downtown Milwaukee. There were 1,200 people, and their prime spot, they wanted me to speak on cumulative stress, burnout, depression, and suicide, and how to be resilient, or how to deal with these kinds of things. And I thought, uh, first, and I thought, well, cybersecurity people. Then I wrapped my mind around that, and I was thinking, and it was at 9:30 at night, and I was thinking, 9:30 at night. I mean, for this old guy, I'm a morning person. It's like, wow, there's a Starbucks across the way, right downtown Milwaukee, the Wisconsin Center. I'm sure you know where it is when you come up this way. But so I made sure I had some caffeine in me. But I'll never forget, I had 3 or 4 people come up to me. And this is just an example of, what happens if I'm speaking at a conference, so that's a teaching mode, but it's also, that presenting mode. But I had a couple of people, and I just kind of sat on the edge of the stage, after everybody else kind of left, and they said, I want to thank you. You helped me tonight, you know. And we videotaped this. I mean, the big conference, they videotaped it, and I'm going to take it back to all my people. You know, I even though I got paid well for that, the money, it wasn't about the money. You know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was the fact that, okay, as long as I'm relevant,
Mm-hmm.
as long as somebody says, hey, this was helpful to me, or this is, I really needed that, or whatever the case may be. um as long as I'm doing that, and God still gives me the energy and the health to do that, I'm going to do it. That's my why right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just as you were talking, I think about, and I've been thinking about this a lot the last few years, and there's always stuff that comes up that'll distract me off of it, and then I'll come back to it. And when I have those things that end up, I'll have this idea and I'll get super energetic about it, and then it something comes up and then it fades. and then I have to be intentional about bringing it back. I'm like, okay, maybe that was more about Kevin than it was about something that I'm getting called into. But when I have something that comes up, I get super excited, but then I get uh, stuff comes up or whatever and get distracted or whatever. But then it comes back up again. And then again, it's kind of like the knocking on the door, right? It's like, it's
That's
like, am
right.
I, am I, or am I not going to open it because this keeps coming back? And so there's something must be there. And
Uh,
when you were just talking about that, I reflect on one of the last times I was reading Viktor Frankl's work, Man's Search for Meaning, and some of the
right.
subsequent what he did with that work after the Holocaust. And he referred to it different times as his work, and that stood out to me. Again, I heard that many times, but this time it stood out to me that this wasn't a job, this wasn't a career, this wasn't his profession. He referred to it as his work. And it was an instrumental thing that he talked about that kept him alive as he was
Yeah.
going through the concentration camp. His
Yeah.
his work that he had there was unfinished business, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I throw that out, the idea of Greg's work, and maybe it's just a question to wrestle with, or maybe you have an answer. What comes to mind when you think of Greg Young's the work that he's doing, your work? In other words, the legacy that you're creating right now.
Well, that's still a process. You know how that
Okay.
works.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's almost like I think if I had to kind of, in listening to you, come up with an answer to that, it's really coming to the fore in this book that I'm writing. Because I might have alluded to this in our first installment of this, but it's even more. It's like I've responded to all this stuff. I mean, we've already talked about that. But in everything I have responded to, or everything I have vicariously experienced, it's almost like a paradigm shift. I look through a different set of lenses, like, the horrible stuff. We talk about the Holocaust. I'm
Mhm.
actually writing about, love's response to the Holocaust, because, we all know there was a whole lot of hatred, and you might dare say call it evil, that was going on there. And I'm trying to flesh out, that's a whole chapter, just on that. you, you know um and for instance, the tornadoes down in Arkansas, why so many people show up for those things? it's because it's because people feel compelled. They're not doing it for the money. They're doing it out of, dare I say, love. Love always responds to horrible stuff. I mean, if you look at long enough, sure, we have to work through. In the book, I don't want to do disservice to saying we want to sweep all this horrible stuff under the rug. No, no, because I know we need to go through that. We need to process it, because that's what post-traumatic growth is. But also we need to look at, that there are always going to be people who respond bearing light. There are always going to be people responding, and you can name it. Las Vegas shooting, I got that in there. Sandy Hook, and the pandemic, we all went through. I mean, it just small, random acts of kindness, things that people did that kind of get lost in the rancor of, you know the stuff and complaints, and but it's there. And that's what I would like to be as a part of my legacy, to remind people that, let's just take the word hate can throw all that it can at us. In fact, I presented this following 9/11 at a candlelight vigil. I said, we've seen what hate can do. Now we see what love can do. And for me, that's always the final word.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I feel very much the same way, right? I feel very much the same way. And I've had, individuals, when it comes to, because of either fear or of something happening, going to happen in the future, or angry about something that already happened, or angry about them having fear about something happening, right? Then they go, well, if your higher power, if God was so good, then why wouldn't he just stop those things from happening?
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
like they would never happen, right?
Yeah.
And it reminded me of somebody who told, I think it was a story slash kind of like a joke, that this person had had died, and I'm not probably not do this story very good justice, but he had worked his whole life and done all these things his whole life, and worked for the weekend, and would complain about the hours and all these things. And at some point, he then died, and he went to a place that all the food was provided for him. That all he had to do was just kind of kick back and sit in the sun and do whatever, and he didn't there wasn't really anything asked of him throughout the days or in the nights or whatever.
Yeah.
And after so much time being there, he goes up to somebody who was of some level of authority, and he goes, hey, is there anything for me, that I can do, that I can make or I can do? And he goes, no, we don't have that here. And he goes, what do you mean you don't have anything? He goes, no, this is what it is. You just be, and you don't have to do anything. He goes, this is hell. And he goes, well, where do you think you are?
Yeah. And when it was going through my head is a vision of, people at feasts. So one person is shown, say, a vision of whatever you want to call Hades, whatever you want to call it, and they have no elbows,
Mm,
and everybody's trying to eat this
yep,
great feast in front of them, but they're so intent on just serving themselves that they're starving to death with
yep.
all of this food because they don't have any elbows to bring food up to their face. I mean, they could stick their face in the food, I presume. But then this person's seen another one, and people have no elbows, and what they're doing is feeding each other.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Very similar kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this idea, right, of when you were just talking about Greg's work, right, is about, and maybe it's going to have different hats and different venues, but it's still this idea of this purpose, this your why of being able to continually, being connected to God as you understand him, so that you can then be that light for whatever circumstances you're being asked to be there.
You're right. And when I trained first responders, I was asking this question because, as you know, we talk about you use the word promptings. They it's like I said, who signed up to do this job to get rich? Give me a show of hands.
Sure.
And I only had that happen once, and that was a funny story. But that, I said, "How's that working out for you?"
Yeah.
I said, "Your job is a calling. Your job, my job, it's a
Mhm.
calling, Kevin, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a calling. It's a calling,
Yeah.
and that gives us meaning and purpose."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think, being able to, today I have I had the mindset that, um, similar to gravity, if I'm on top of the roof and I'm up there, doing some, or I'm looking outside my window right now, and there's a railing, a deck over, we're on the second floor, and if I'm walking in that railing and I fall and end up breaking my leg, that isn't necessarily anything, God or anything's fault. It's called
Right.
gravity.
Right.
It's just part of the laws of the world that we exist in. And so it's now that could be considered a bad thing if I look at it that way, or it could be a turning point in my life where it ends up being the best thing that ever happened to me, or the catalyst for the best thing that ever happened to me.
Right.
It's what am I going to do with, now that I have broken my leg from falling off the porch? have I learned that maybe I shouldn't walk on the railing? Maybe, yeah, maybe I've learned other things as well, and so this idea of, is that when bad things happen, I love that part where you said when bad things happen, yes, we need to address the darkness,
Yes,
and we need to address the things that may be causing the darkness, but we need to do it with love, not necessarily with more darkness.
that's right. That's right. Because there is light at the end of the darkness.
Yeah.
There's light in the darkness. It's interesting. I've often used the analogy, Kevin. Imagine, we've heard the expression helicopter parents,
Mm-hmm.
helicopter parents where, use WKRP. I don't know if you remember that show at all.
Mm-hmm. Oh
We all
yeah.
remember that.
Yep.
They're doing the air helicopter air traffic report or whatever. But imagine, with any children that we raise our children, we're able to protect them from every little bit of heartbreak, disappointment, adversity, any kind of adversity, until they become old enough to be on their own. None of that stuff. And we release them, they're on their own, go out into the world. Are they going to be prepared for the world?
Mm.
No. We know the answer to that, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't wish bad things to happen to people, but you know, we learn and grow from them. It's what we do with, how we respond to them, at
Yeah.
least from my perspective. So
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting about that, wishing good things upon someone or wishing bad things on somebody, right? Probably doesn't have anything on if they happen or not, but it definitely has something to do with how it affects me.
yeah,
And if I'm wishing bad things on people, then where's my mindset to do that?
uh-huh.
And if I'm wishing good things on people, where's my mindset? Because it isn't going to change the outcome of the game or the incident or whatever the situation
Yes.
is,
Yeah.
but it definitely is going to impact my present, with which one I
Yeah.
focus on. So,
Well,
but to your, go ahead.
I was simply going to say, I'm going to give you an expression if you're not familiar with it, because you're talking about wishing bad things. Let's just use the word hate again. One of the theologians that was very influential on me was, he was really kind of the psychologist in the pulpit during World War II, Harry Emerson Fosdick, very renowned at Riverside Church in New York. A lot of prestigious pastors come out of there. He once made the expression that hating somebody is like burning down your house to get rid of a rat.
Yep. Yep.
That's all I was
Yep.
going to say.
Yep. Yep. Very, very, very much so. Very much so. Well, Greg, I super appreciate you coming on the show and sharing just your thoughts and having a conversation with you again. Knowing that, there may be just one thing that, our conversation back and forth may benefit one of the listeners. I know that every time I get a chance to talk with you, I benefit from that. So I appreciate that.
As do
Um,
I. As do I.
well, thank you. And now you've referred to your book again. You referred to your book, and I know you're in the process of writing. Where do you have a title for the book yet?
Oh, that's yet to be determined. But
Okay.
basically, it's basically. In fact, somebody who's been doing some reading of the book, real quick, has been doing some just to get their feedback. They said this is soul food. Yeah,
Ah.
but I mean, that would be kind of a quirky title,
Yeah.
but it's along the theme, um, love always has a final word,
Yep.
so it's going to be,
Nice.
that's kind of a working theme.
Sure.
So I don't really have a title other than that.
Okay.
That's kind of
Okay.
the theme that runs through. Yeah.
Gotcha. Do you have anticipated time when you might be
Done? Have it
yes.
completed?
Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping to get it done by the end of the year.
Okay.
There's some time up at this lovely spot, in the background behind me, because that's
Yep.
where I don't get too distracted.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
I'm like, you got 1,000 hats we have to wear.
Yep. Yep.
And but it's well underway. But there are times I feel like when I do a wood sculpture, I used to teach wood sculpture. There's a time I always tell you would tell my students that you look at the project and you think, oh, this is horrible. I don't like it. I'll say, walk away from it for a while.
Yep.
And come back to it. That's been very teachable for me in working on this book. I think I don't like this, and
Yeah.
I'll step back from a few days in that process. I mean, you know how that works.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where it's at. But but it is, it's proceeding for sure.
Perfect. Well, Greg, I really appreciate our conversation. I appreciate the friendship that we have created over the last few months, and looking forward to more conversations, and definitely looking forward to this project when you get this completed. And I'll definitely be on the list to get a copy and read that copy. So, um, if for some reason someone wanted to reach out to you and either ask you about something, or even have you come and speak or something, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Well, probably the best way would be either, Kevin, my cell phone, which is 414-573-6008, or probably my an email, incident response, critical incident response at gmail.com. Thanks, buddy, for having me. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. As always, whenever we have a guest come on, I think we have an opportunity to not only get to know them as a person, and what drives them, what motivates them. And as Greg was sharing today about his story, and the things that energize him, and the things that uh, perpetuate him into his work. Hopefully that you can just take a piece away from that, and either utilize that for yourself, share that with someone else, or maybe even inspire you to follow your work as well. As always, thank you for being here, and I look forward to being with you next week.